4 weeks after her husband's funeral, Evelyn Hart was living in the darkness of the damp cellar beneath what had once been her own home. The heavy wooden door closed each day like a sentence passed without trial. Rope marks still circled her wrists, the dried blood dark against her skin. Her white nightgown was now stained with mud and fear. The Hart brothers, Judd, Caleb, and Isaac, divided Thomas's property like victors after a battle, and Evelyn became the excess left behind, held not by iron chains but by threats that hovered in every footstep, every glance. Down in the cellar, the cracked oil lamp flickered weakly, rats scurried in the shadows, and the stench of damp clung to her skin. On the stone wall, a single word had been carved with a rusted nail: leave. It was a reminder, a vow, the one thing that kept Evelyn standing when everything else had been stripped away. She did not cry. She did not beg. By day she endured. By night she listened, memorizing every stone, every crack, every sound from the wooden floor above. Evelyn understood clearly. The Hart family was in no hurry to act, convinced that time itself would break her. But in the silence of the cellar, a decision was taking shape. She would not wait to be saved. She was waiting for the moment when she would step out of the darkness on her own. Each night, when the house above sank into silence, Evelyn began her quiet preparations. With no paper or pen, no steady light, she learned to remember with her fingertips and the rhythm of her breathing. Every footstep on the stairs, every creaking floorboard, every patch of cold, damp wall in the cellar was memorized like a map for survival. Fear did not disappear, but it was folded away, making room for clarity. Behind a loose stone in the corner of the wall, Evelyn hid a shard of broken glass, carefully wrapped in a piece of torn cloth. It was not a weapon meant for attack, but a promise to herself. If the door ever opened in the worst possible way, she would not submit. On the stone wall, the word leave grew deeper each day, not through force of hand, but through will. It became a silent prayer, reminding her that this cellar was only a passage, not her fate. By day, Evelyn sat still, appearing resigned under prying looks and half-joking laughter. By night, she calculated time, listened to the pulse of the house, waiting for a mistake, a gap. She did not dream of miracles or heroes. What she prepared for was a single moment, the moment quiet enough to step forward, fast enough not to look back, and hard enough to leave the place that had tried to bury her alive. One night, the familiar sounds from the house above suddenly changed. It was no longer just the heavy footsteps or the dry, cruel laughter of the Hart brothers, but the voice of a stranger, deeper, calmer, lacking the familiar scent of threat. Evelyn pressed her ear to the cellar door, holding her breath as she listened. A brief question was asked, followed by Judd's brusque reply. The stranger wasn't looking for trouble. He was only asking for a place to sleep for the night. When the house fell silent, Evelyn opened the cellar door. For the first time in weeks, it was not locked. She stepped onto the wooden floor, barefoot, making no sound. The front door was only a few steps away, but the glow of the fireplace stopped her. The stranger was slumped asleep in a chair, his hat shadowing half his face, a gun resting by his foot. A silver coin glinted on the floor. The light cast across his face stirred an old memory. 10 years earlier, at a dusty train station, a young stranger had shared half a loaf of bread with her and told her she deserved something better. Now the same weariness was there, layered with scars and years. Evelyn whispered his name, Will. Gray eyes opened instantly, alert in a way that felt unnatural. No shouting, no questions. Evelyn whispered that she needed help. In that moment, for the first time in weeks, she felt air fill her lungs as if the door leading out of the darkness had finally begun to open. They left the house when the night had settled into its deepest quiet. Will went first, cutting a path through the forest behind the house as if he had once belonged there. Evelyn followed, her bare feet striking cold stones, each step sharp with pain, yet she did not slow down. She did not complain. This pain was cleaner than the stench of damp from the cellar. Once they were out of sight of the Hart house, Will stopped beside a black horse. He pulled a wool coat from the saddlebag and draped it over Evelyn's shoulders, a simple gesture that made her shiver not only from the cold. They did not ask many questions, No promises, no long plans. There was only one direction: away. They rode through the night, avoiding familiar paths, cutting through forest trails only Will seemed to know. Morning mist clung to Evelyn's hair, her breath turning to smoke. She knew he was risking his life for her, and that made her both grateful and wary. This was not a story of being rescued. It was an unspoken agreement. As the pale light of dawn spread across the sky, they reached an old cabin half buried in a hillside. The roof sagged, the hearth was cold, but it had four walls and a door that could be closed from the inside. Will built a fire. Evelyn sat near the warmth, pulling the coat tight around herself. She was no longer in the cellar. But they both understood. This was not the end, only a place to stand long enough to take the next step. Evelyn woke while the sky was still gray and cold. The cabin was silent. The fire burned down to ash, yet the feeling of being hunted still pressed against her chest. She understood clearly. The Hart brothers would not let this go. Running only stretched the fear, it did not end it. So before Will could speak, Evelyn made her decision. She would go back. She knew the land around the Hart farm like the lines of her own palm, the little-used trails, the stream that ran dry this season, the hillside where the wind always shifted. She did not ask for permission. She stated what she wanted, not to be protected, but to stand on her own feet. Will studied her for a long moment, neither arguing nor stopping her. In the end, he simply nodded and checked his gun, a silent consent. Evelyn returned to the old paths, but not as someone fleeing. She deliberately left signs behind: broken branches, fresh footprints, markers clear enough to be followed. She wanted them to come. Not out of recklessness, but because she had chosen the place and the time. On the slope overlooking the road back to the farm, Evelyn stood with her back straight, wearing the borrowed coat, her hand resting on the cold steel of the gun. For the first time since being locked in the cellar, she was no longer reacting to fear, she was directing it. And in that moment, Evelyn was no longer the one running, but the one setting a trap for her own past. They came just as the sun lifted over the tree line, the thunder of hooves shattering the valley's quiet. Evelyn and Will were hidden behind a rocky outcrop above the narrow road that climbed the mountainside. The wind blew against them, carrying the Hart brothers' harsh voices uphill. Evelyn saw them clearly now, not as threatening shadows in a dark cellar, but as flesh and blood men walking straight into a trap. The first gunshot rang out like a declaration. Evelyn pulled the trigger without a tremor. Caleb fell from his horse before he even understood what was happening, his body hitting the rocky ground hard. Shouts erupted. Judd and Isaac charged toward cover, firing back in panic. Bullets tore into tree trunks, stones shattered, but Evelyn did not retreat. She reloaded, took aim, and fired again fast, clean, without hesitation. Will held position beside her, shooting with precision, covering her as they tried to spread out. Judd screamed orders. Isaac cursed through the gunfire. The fight was short, brutal, and left no room for fear. This was not blind revenge, it was an ending. When the smoke thinned on the mountainside, Evelyn stood upright amid the smell of gunpowder and damp earth. One of the men who had imprisoned her lay still. The others were being driven back. For the first time, silence returned, not the silence of terror, but the hollow calm that comes after chains are finally broken. Judd collapsed by the stream, his body folding into the muddy water, eyes still open but with nothing left to say. Evelyn stood motionless, her gun still lowered, thin smoke curling from the barrel like a final breath. She felt no triumph, no trembling, only a necessary ending, as clear and final as a period at the end of a sentence. Will appeared behind her, quickly scanning the trees before lowering his weapon. He asked simply, without emotion, whether she was all right, whether she needed anything. Evelyn didn't look at him right away. She looked at the man who had locked her in the cellar, who had believed time and fear would break her will. Now, he was nothing more than a body lying in the open wilderness. Evelyn turned back, her gaze steady. She said she did not need to be saved, not now, not before. She had walked out of the cellar on her own, chosen her ground, pulled the trigger when it mattered. Will didn't argue. He only nodded, as if he finally understood how she wanted to be seen, not as a survivor who had been spared, but as someone who had decided her own fate. Amid the lingering smell of gunpowder, a new understanding formed in silence. No one owed the other their life. There was no hero and no one rescued. Just two people standing side by side after the storm, choosing to keep walking in the same direction, not out of pity, but out of respect. They did not return to the old house. There was no reason to look back. Evelyn and Will rode west, passing through dusty towns where no one asked who they were or what they had lived through. By day, they followed back roads. By night, they slept under star-filled skies or in abandoned houses where the wind creaked through broken boards. With every mile behind her, Evelyn felt the change within herself: sun-darkened skin, calloused hands, eyes that no longer flinched or turned away. Will didn't ask where she planned to go. Evelyn didn't need to explain. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It became a space for healing. She learned to shoot better, to read the land, to trust the rhythm of her own breathing. No one gave orders. No one led. They moved side by side. One evening, as the sky turned gold over the open grasslands, Evelyn stopped by a narrow stream and looked at the low line of trees and the stretch of ground flat enough to build on. She said they could stop here not to hide, but to begin. Will smiled, realizing this was the first time she had chosen a place for the sake of the future, not out of fear. Do you think true freedom begins when we run away, or in the moment we dare to stop and choose for ourselves? Leave a comment to share your thoughts, and don't forget to follow to continue Evelyn's journey in the next chapters. Peace does not arrive by promise, and the past rarely stays buried. One morning, while thin mist still clung to the trail, Evelyn saw a cloud of dust rising in the distance. 6 riders, armed, carrying a look she knew all too well, the look of men who believe violence grants them power. Leading them was Clyde, his face older now, but his cruelty untouched by time. Evelyn and Will did not panic. They had prepared for this long ago. The path into the valley narrowed, thick forest pressing in on both sides. Traps lay hidden beneath dry leaves and loose earth. Low-strung wire, buried stakes, everything placed so the land itself became an ally. As the riders pushed deeper in, the first traps sprang, screams tore through the morning. Horses panicked, bodies fell amid chaos. Clyde shouted orders to spread out, gunfire cracking through the trees. Evelyn stepped from the shadows, her voice clear and steady. She said she had survived, and she would never return to being prey. Her shot forced Clyde to his knees. Will fired with precision, each round clean and deliberate, nothing wasted. The confrontation ended as quickly as it had begun. Those still alive fled, leaving blood and fear behind. Evelyn stood in the smoke-filled trail and understood that this time, she wasn't only defending herself, she was defending the life she had chosen. Many years passed, and the land that had once been wild now bore the shape of a home. A wooden house stood quietly beside the stream, old cracks mended by time and patient hands. Each evening, Evelyn stepped onto the porch and watched the sunlight settle over the grasslands, warmth spreading across skin once accustomed to darkness. Behind her came the simple sounds of an ordinary life: the soft clink of dishes, the sweep of a broom, children's laughter carried on the wind. The past did not disappear, but it no longer bound her. Evelyn still remembered the damp cellar, the names of those who had tried to own her, the nights spent holding her breath just to survive. She remembered not to suffer again, but to measure the distance she had traveled. Those memories became markers, not chains. Will sat on the porch, quiet as always, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. Between them, there was no need for grand promises. What kept them there was a choice made every day to stay, to build, to protect, and to live more slowly. Evelyn understood now that freedom does not come from abandoning everything, but from stopping the act of running. When night fell and stars glittered across the wide sky, Evelyn smiled. The widow in the dark cellar was gone. What remained was a woman standing firmly on her own land, exactly where she belonged.